The woman who could destroy careers with a single word stepped out of the taxi wearing jeans and scuffed boots. Her true identity hidden beneath layers of deception that would fool even the most seasoned officers. Naval Station Pacific Ridge stretched before her in the pre-dawn darkness, its massive warships sleeping like steel giants in the harbor, unaware that their fate was about to be decided by the unassuming figure walking through their gates. She had commanded fleets worth billions of dollars, made decisions that saved thousands of lives, and earned the respect of admirals whose names appeared in history books. But this morning, Jessica Chen looked like nothing more than another temporary contractor arriving for a routine assignment. The irony was perfect and dangerous. In her worn leather portfolio lay orders that told only half the truth. The rest was buried in classified files that would make seasoned officers pale if they knew what was really happening at their beloved Pacific Ridge. Someone had been stealing more than supplies. Someone had been selling secrets. And someone was about to discover that the quiet woman they were about to dismiss and mock was the most dangerous person to ever walk through their gates. The fog rolled thick across the base, swallowing the massive gray hulls of destroyers and cruisers until they looked like ghosts floating on calm water. It was the perfect cover for what she had come to do. By the time the sun burned through the morning mist, careers would be ended and lives would be changed forever. She adjusted the strap of her single duffel bag and walked toward the main gate, each step bringing her closer to a confrontation that no one saw coming. The guard at the gate, Petty Officer Second Class Rodriguez, barely glanced up from his clipboard as she approached the window. His coffee was getting cold, and he had 17 more hours left on a duty rotation that felt like it would never end. "Ma'am," he said without looking at her directly. "Purpose of visit? Temporary assignment," she replied quietly, sliding her ID and orders through the window. "Reporting to Fleet Command." Rodriguez scanned the documents with practiced disinterest. The orders looked routine: administrative transfer, temporary duty, nothing that would require his full attention. The woman's photo matched her face, though her civilian clothes seemed oddly informal for someone reporting to Fleet Command. "Jessica Chen," he read aloud from the ID. "You'll want Building 7, ma'am. Take the main road straight back about half a mile. Big gray building with the flags out front. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today?" She nodded once, took back her documents, and walked through the gate. Rodriguez was already turning back to his paperwork before she reached the sidewalk. Just another face passing through, another temporary assignment that would disappear into the vast bureaucracy of the Navy. Jessica Chen walked slowly along the tree-lined road that cut through the heart of Pacific Ridge. Around her, the base hummed with the quiet efficiency of a major naval installation. Sailors in working uniforms moved between buildings with purposeful strides. The distant sound of machinery drifted from the shipyard where massive cranes worked to maintain the fleet. She had spent more than half her life in places like this, but never quite like this. Never as a stranger, observing from the outside, watching the rhythm of command without being part of it. The sensation was both familiar and deeply unsettling. As she passed a group of junior officers heading toward the commissary, she caught fragments of their conversation: complaints about readiness inspections, frustration with new regulations, jokes about leadership that was out of touch with reality. The same grumbling she had heard on bases around the world, the eternal voice of junior personnel who believed their superiors had never done the hard work of actually running a ship. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the woman walking past them in civilian clothes had commanded task forces in the Persian Gulf, had made decisions in storm-tossed waters that kept their ships afloat and their shipmates alive, had earned every star on her shoulders through nights spent on the bridge while others slept safely in their racks below. But today, she was just another face in the crowd. Another temporary assignment that would come and go without leaving a mark on their awareness. Building 7 rose before her like a concrete monument to military bureaucracy. 6 stories of gray efficiency, windows arranged in perfect rows, the American flag and Navy Jack snapping in the morning breeze. The kind of building where decisions were made that affected thousands of sailors, though most of those sailors would never see the inside of these corridors. The lobby buzzed with quiet activity. Officers in dress uniforms moved between offices with folders and tablets, their conversations conducted in the low tones of people handling important business. A receptionist sat behind a polished desk, her uniform pressed to perfection, her manner professionally courteous. "Good morning," Jessica said, approaching the desk. "Jessica Chen, reporting for temporary assignment." The receptionist, a chief petty officer whose nameplate read Harrison, took the orders and scanned them quickly. Her expression remained neutral, but Jessica caught the slight frown that suggested confusion. "Ma'am, these orders are unusual," Chief Harrison said carefully. "They show you reporting directly to Admiral Morrison's office, but they don't specify your role or clearance level." "I understand there may be some confusion," Jessica replied calmly. "I was told to report directly to the Admiral's staff, and they would provide clarification." Chief Harrison picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Commander Walsh? I have a Jessica Chen here with orders to report to Admiral Morrison's office." "Yes, sir." "Temporary assignment. No specific role listed." "Yes, sir." She hung up and looked back at Jessica with barely concealed skepticism. "Commander Walsh will be down in a moment to escort you. Please have a seat." Jessica settled into one of the leather chairs in the waiting area, placing her duffel at her feet and opening her portfolio. Inside were documents that told only part of the story. Enough to establish her presence here, but not enough to reveal why she had really come. The truth was buried in classified files that most of the people in this building would never be cleared to read. Pacific Ridge had problems. Serious problems that had been carefully hidden from outside inspection. Problems that could compromise the readiness of the entire Pacific Fleet if they weren't addressed quickly and quietly. Someone needed to investigate those problems without triggering the defensive reactions that came whenever headquarters sent official inspection teams. Someone who could walk through the base unnoticed, observing the daily reality that existed below the surface of official reports. Someone like Rear Admiral Jessica Chen, commander of Task Force 77, one of the most successful battle group leaders in the modern Navy. The woman who had led 17 ships through the Strait of Hormuz under hostile fire and brought them all home without a single casualty. But for the next 2 weeks, she would be nobody special, just another temporary assignment that the base would barely notice. Commander Walsh appeared at the elevator, a tall man in his 30s, with the bearing of someone who had learned to navigate the complex waters of staff politics. His uniform was immaculate, his manner professionally correct, but Jessica could see the calculation in his eyes as he evaluated this unexpected visitor. "Miss Chen," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Pacific Ridge. I understand you have orders to report to Admiral Morrison's office?" "That's correct," Jessica replied, shaking his hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. "I appreciate you taking the time to escort me." As they rode the elevator to the 4th floor, Commander Walsh made the kind of polite conversation that filled awkward silences without revealing anything important. The weather, the traffic, the general efficiency of the base, safe topics that avoided the real question hovering in the air. Who was Jessica Chen? And what was she really doing here? The elevator opened onto a corridor lined with offices belonging to the senior staff of Pacific Ridge. Behind these doors, the real work of Fleet Command took place. The coordination of training schedules, maintenance priorities, deployment rotations, and the 1,000 other details that kept the Navy's most powerful ships ready for whatever missions they might face. Commander Walsh led her to an office near the end of the hall, knocking briefly before opening the door. "Admiral Morrison, this is Jessica Chen." Rear Admiral David Morrison looked up from a desk covered with reports and charts, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He was a man in his late 50s with gray hair and the kind of steady presence that came from decades of command responsibility. But as he looked at Jessica, his expression showed the same confusion she had seen on Chief Harrison's face. "Miss Chen," he said, rising from his desk. "Please, have a seat. I have to admit, Your orders are somewhat vague. They indicate you're here for temporary assignment, but they don't specify exactly what you'll be doing. Jessica settled into the chair across from his desk, her manner calm and professional. Admiral, I understand this may seem irregular. I've been sent by Fleet Command to conduct an informal assessment of certain operational aspects of Pacific Ridge. What kind of assessment? Admiral Morrison asked, his tone sharpening slightly. General readiness, efficiency measures, morale indicators, Jessica replied smoothly. Nothing formal, nothing that would disrupt normal operations. Think of it as a routine check-in from headquarters. Admiral Morrison studied her face carefully. Something about this woman didn't add up. Her manner was too composed, her bearing too confident for a simple staff assessment officer. But her orders bore the proper seals, and questioning directives from Fleet Command was not a career-enhancing move. Very well, he said finally. Commander Walsh will arrange for you to have access to the areas you need to observe. How long do you anticipate this assessment taking? 2 weeks should be sufficient, Jessica replied. I prefer to work quietly, without drawing attention to the process. The most accurate assessments come when people behave naturally. What she didn't say was that 2 weeks would be more than enough time to identify the security breach that had been hemorrhaging classified information from Pacific Ridge for the past 6 months. More than enough time to trace the money trail that had been funding luxury lifestyles for certain officers. And more than enough time to gather the evidence that would send several people to federal prison. As Commander Walsh led her back to the elevator, Jessica caught a glimpse of the base through the office windows. Thousands of sailors going about their daily duties, unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. Most of them were good people. Honest people who had dedicated their lives to serving their country. But some of them were not. By afternoon, word had spread through the junior officer network that a civilian assessor was wandering around the base, taking notes and asking questions. The reaction was predictably cynical, seasoned with the kind of gallows humor that military personnel use to cope with unwelcome oversight. Another efficiency expert, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake, muttered to her colleague as they watched Jessica walk past the administration building. Bet she's never spent a day at sea in her life, but she'll write a report about how we can do everything better. Blake was the kind of officer who had risen through the ranks on political skill rather than operational competence. She had friends in high places, a talent for avoiding difficult assignments, and a gift for making herself indispensable to senior officers who valued loyalty over ability. What she didn't have was integrity. Lieutenant Commander Tom Harrison nodded agreement as he sipped his coffee. Look at her, he said dismissively. Probably some contractor getting paid 3 times what we make to tell us our job. I give it a week before she recommends cutting our manning and increasing our workload. They weren't alone in their assessment. Throughout the base, Jessica's presence was generating the same reaction. Eye rolls, complaints, and the assumption that she was just another bureaucrat sent to make their lives more difficult. No one looked at the quiet woman in civilian clothes and saw a threat to their carefully constructed schemes. That was exactly what Jessica was counting on. Her first stop was the supply department, where Lieutenant Commander Blake held court over a domain that included everything from spare parts to toilet paper. The office was efficiently organized, the computers hummed with activity, and the staff moved with the crisp professionalism that looked impressive to casual observers. Miss Chen, Blake said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Welcome to supply. I understand you're here to assess our operations? That's correct, Jessica replied, pulling out a small notebook. I'm particularly interested in procurement procedures and inventory management. Nothing too detailed. Just trying to get a sense of how things flow through the system. Blake's smile faltered slightly. Of course. Though I should mention that our procedures are all by the book. We've never had any issues with accountability or documentation. The protest came too quickly, with too much emphasis. Jessica had heard the same defensive tone from dozens of officers over the years, and it always meant the same thing. Someone was hiding something, and they were nervous about discovery. "I'm sure everything is in order," Jessica said pleasantly. "I'd just like to observe the normal routine. Pretend I'm not here." For the next hour, she watched the supply department in action. On the surface, everything looked professional and efficient. Requisitions were processed, shipments were logged, and inventory reports were filed with mechanical precision. But Jessica's trained eye caught details that others missed. The subtle hesitation when certain vendor names were mentioned. The way conversations stopped when she approached certain computer terminals. The nervous glances exchanged between Blake and her senior staff when they thought she wasn't looking. Most telling of all was the luxury watch on Blake's wrist, a Rolex Submariner that cost more than a lieutenant commander's monthly salary. The kind of watch that suggested income sources beyond Navy pay. "Interesting piece," Jessica commented casually, nodding toward Blake's wrist. Blake's hand moved instinctively to cover the watch. "Thank you. It was a gift from my father when I made lieutenant commander." Another lie. Delivered with the same too-quick defensiveness. Jessica made a mental note and continued her observation, filing away details that would become crucial evidence in the weeks to come. At the communications center, the reaction was different, but equally revealing. Senior Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez ran a tight operation, his technicians working with the focused intensity of people who understood the critical nature of their mission. When Jessica introduced herself and explained her purpose, Rodriguez's response was professional, but guarded. "Ma'am, we handle a lot of classified material here," he said carefully. "I'll need to check on what level of access you have before I can show you certain systems." "Of course," Jessica replied. "I understand security protocols. I'm only interested in general efficiency measures, response times, maintenance schedules, that sort of thing." Rodriguez nodded, but his body language remained tense. Like Blake, he seemed uncomfortable with scrutiny, but for different reasons. Where Blake's nervousness suggested guilt, Rodriguez's caution suggested someone protecting legitimate secrets. As she observed the communications center, Jessica began to understand how the security breach was operating. The systems were secure, the personnel were professional, but there were vulnerabilities in the human element. People with access who might be compromised, procedures that could be subverted by someone with the right knowledge and wrong intentions. The pattern was becoming clear, but the specifics remained hidden. Someone was very good at covering their tracks. By evening, Jessica had completed her initial survey of the base's key facilities. She had seen enough to confirm her suspicions and identify several persons of interest, but she had also accomplished something else. She had established herself as a harmless bureaucrat whose presence would quickly become background noise. As she walked back toward the temporary quarters that had been assigned to her, she passed groups of sailors heading to the enlisted club or the base exchange. Their conversations were the eternal complaints of military personnel everywhere. Too much work, too little recognition. Leaders who didn't understand the real challenges they faced. None of them paid any attention to the woman in civilian clothes walking past them in the gathering dusk. None of them suspected that she had commanded more ships than most of them had ever served on, or that she was here to clean house in a way that would leave the base forever changed. The second day brought Jessica's first real test. She was observing the morning briefing in the operations center when Commander Walsh approached with a frown on his face and a phone in his hand. "Miss Chen," he said quietly, "there's been a question raised about your clearance level. Some of the information you've been requesting access to requires higher authorization than what's shown in your orders." Jessica looked up from her notebook with an expression of mild concern. "What kind of authorization issue?" "Lieutenant Commander Blake is questioning whether you should have access to detailed procurement records. She's citing security regulations and suggesting that your assessment should be limited to general observations." The challenge was predictable. Blake was starting to feel pressure and was looking for ways to limit Jessica's access to information. It was a defensive move, but also a potentially dangerous one if it forced Jessica to reveal more of her actual authority than she wanted to at this stage. "I understand Lieutenant Commander Blake's concerns," Jessica said carefully. "Perhaps we should discuss this with Admiral Morrison." As they walked toward the Admiral's office, Jessica considered her options. She could reveal her true identity and authority, which would solve the access problem immediately, but would also end her ability to observe the base's normal operations. Or she could find a way to deflect Blake's challenge without exposing her cover. Admiral Morrison listened to Commander Walsh's explanation with the weary expression of a senior officer dealing with territorial disputes between his staff. When Walsh finished, Morrison turned to Jessica with a questioning look. "Miss Chen, perhaps you could clarify exactly what level of access you need for your assessment?" Before Jessica could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the display and saw a number that made her pulse quicken. A direct line from the Pentagon that only rang when something had gone seriously wrong. "Excuse me," she said, stepping toward the window. "I need to take this call." The voice on the other end was crisp and urgent. "Admiral Chen, we have a problem. Intelligence suggests that classified information from Pacific Ridge is being offered for sale on dark web markets. The breach is accelerating." Jessica's jaw tightened as she absorbed the implications. The timeline had just collapsed. What was supposed to be a careful, methodical investigation now had to become a rapid response before more damage was done. "Understood," she said quietly, initiating immediate protocols. She ended the call and turned back to Admiral Morrison and Commander Walsh, who were watching her with growing curiosity. The careful balance of her cover story was about to collapse, but she no longer had the luxury of maintaining it. "Admiral Morrison," she said, her voice taking on a tone of authority that hadn't been there before. "I need to speak with you privately, immediately." Something in her manner must have communicated the urgency of the situation, because Morrison dismissed Commander Walsh without argument and closed the office door. "Miss Chen," he began, but Jessica was already reaching into her portfolio for documents that would change everything. "Admiral Morrison, my actual name is Rear Admiral Jessica Chen, Commander of Task Force 77. I'm here under direct orders from the Chief of Naval Operations to investigate security breaches that have been traced to this installation." She placed her real orders on his desk, documents bearing classifications and authorizations that made her temporary assignment paperwork look like grocery lists. Morrison's face went pale as he read the true scope of her mission. "My God," he whispered. "How long have you been investigating us?" 18 hours, Jessica replied grimly. "And in that time, I've identified several persons of interest and confirmed that the breach is more serious than initially suspected. Someone on this base has been selling classified information, and they're accelerating their activities." Morrison's hands shook slightly as he set down the orders. "What do you need from me?" "Complete cooperation and absolute secrecy. The people responsible for this breach cannot know that I'm here in an official capacity. If they suspect an investigation, they'll destroy evidence and disappear." The Admiral nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. "Admiral Chen, I want you to know that I had no knowledge of any security breach. This base has always—" Jessica held up a hand to stop him. "Admiral Morrison, I believe you're innocent of any wrongdoing. But someone on your staff is not, and we're going to find them before they can do any more damage to our national security." As the two admirals began planning the next phase of the investigation, neither of them noticed Lieutenant Commander Blake walking past the office door. But Blake noticed the serious expressions through the window, the classified documents on the desk, and the way the mysterious civilian assessor was now speaking to Admiral Morrison with unmistakable authority. Blake's blood ran cold as she realized that her carefully constructed scheme was about to collapse around her. The woman she had dismissed as a harmless bureaucrat was clearly something else entirely, something dangerous. By that evening, encrypted messages were flying through digital channels that the Navy didn't monitor, warning certain parties that their operation had been compromised. Money began moving through offshore accounts as people prepared to disappear before questions could be asked. But they were already too late. Admiral Jessica Chen had spent her career hunting threats to American naval power, whether they wore enemy uniforms or American ones, and she had never failed to complete a mission once she had identified her target. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, and the prey had no idea how skilled their predator really was. Meanwhile, throughout the base, word was spreading through informal networks that the civilian assessor was somehow connected to Admiral Morrison at a level that suggested much more than a routine evaluation. Sailors who had dismissed her as unimportant began to wonder who she really was and what she was really doing at Pacific Ridge. The whispers started quietly, but they were growing louder with each passing hour, and soon those whispers would reach the wrong ears and trigger events that no one could control. The call came at 0347 hours, shattering the pre-dawn quiet of Naval Station Pacific Ridge with the urgent wail of the general alarm. Jessica bolted upright in her temporary quarters, instantly awake with the reflexes of someone who had spent decades responding to maritime emergencies. General quarters. General quarters. All hands to general quarters. This is not a drill. Security alert condition, Bravo, is now in effect. All personnel report to assigned stations immediately. Through her window, Jessica could see figures running across the base in the darkness. Emergency vehicles racing toward the waterfront, with their lights cutting through the night. Whatever was happening was serious enough to wake the entire installation. Her phone rang as she was pulling on her clothes. Admiral Morrison's voice was tense and urgent. Admiral Chen, we need you at the command center immediately. We have a situation that, well, it appears to be connected to your investigation. Jessica was already moving toward the door. What kind of situation? Someone broke into the communications center 90 minutes ago. They accessed classified systems and downloaded files before triggering the security system on their way out. The base is locked down and we're conducting a manhunt, but... Morrison's voice trailed off, and Jessica could hear the strain in his silence. But what, Admiral? But whoever did this knew exactly which systems to target and how to access them without leaving digital fingerprints. This wasn't some random break-in. This was a professional intelligence operation. Jessica's jaw tightened as she stepped out into the chaos of the base-wide alert. Emergency lights bathed everything in harsh red, and the sound of boots on pavement echoed from all directions as security teams spread out across Pacific Ridge. "I'm on my way," she said, but even as she spoke, her tactical mind was already processing the implications. The corruption network she had been investigating wasn't just stealing money. They were selling national security secrets to foreign operatives, and her presence had forced them to accelerate their timeline. The command center was a hive of frantic activity when Jessica arrived. Officers bent over computer terminals, their faces illuminated by the glow of screens, displaying security feeds and tracking data. Radio chatter filled the air as search teams reported their positions and findings throughout the base. Commander Walsh met her at the door, his usual composure cracked by the pressure of the emergency. "Admiral Chen, the breach occurred in Sector 7 of the Communications Center. Someone with detailed knowledge of our security protocols managed to access the classified servers for approximately 14 minutes before the intrusion was detected." "Casualties?" Jessica asked, her command voice cutting through the noise around them. "None, thankfully. But the damage assessment is still ongoing. We won't know what was compromised until the cybersecurity team can complete their analysis." Jessica moved to the central display, where a detailed map of the base showed the positions of security teams and the areas that had been searched. The pattern was telling. Whoever had broken into the communications center had known exactly how to avoid the primary patrol routes and security cameras. "This was an inside job," she said grimly. "Someone with legitimate access helped plan this operation." Admiral Morrison approached, his face pale with the realization that his base had been compromised at the highest levels. "Admiral Chen, I need to ask, is this connected to the security breach you've been investigating?" Jessica studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities and connections. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone had learned that she was investigating the corruption network, and they had decided to grab whatever they could before disappearing. Admiral Morrison, I believe this break-in was triggered by my investigation. Someone realized they were being watched and decided to cut their losses. As if summoned by her words, Lieutenant Commander Blake appeared at the edge of the command center. She looked haggard and nervous. Her usually perfect uniform rumpled as if she had dressed hastily. When she saw Jessica standing next to Admiral Morrison, her face went white. Admiral Morrison, Blake said, her voice carefully controlled. I came as soon as I heard about the security breach. Is there anything Supply can do to assist with the investigation? Jessica watched Blake carefully, noting the way her eyes darted toward the exits and the subtle tremor in her hands. The woman was terrified, and trying desperately to appear helpful while gathering intelligence about the investigation. Lieutenant Commander Blake, Jessica said quietly, I have some questions about procurement procedures that might be relevant to this breach. Blake's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the panic underneath. Of course, ma'am. Though I'm not sure how supply issues would relate to a communications breach. Oh, you'd be surprised, Jessica replied, her tone deceptively casual. Security breaches often involve multiple departments working together. The words hit Blake like physical blows. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a new voice cut through the tension from across the command center. Admiral Morrison, we've found something. Senior Chief Rodriguez stood beside a computer terminal, his face grim as he gestured toward the screen. The intrusion wasn't just random data gathering. Whoever broke in was looking for specific files related to fleet deployment schedules and weapons systems capabilities. Jessica moved to the terminal, her expression growing darker as she read the preliminary damage assessment. The stolen information included classified details about the Pacific Fleet's operational readiness, deployment rotations, and technical specifications for advanced weapons systems. This isn't industrial espionage, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades protecting national security. This is strategic intelligence gathering for a foreign adversary. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. Everyone present understood that they were no longer dealing with simple corruption or theft. They were dealing with treason. Admiral Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. How bad is this? Jessica looked around the room, seeing the faces of officers who had dedicated their lives to defending their country, now confronting the reality that someone among them had been selling that country's secrets. If this information reaches the wrong hands, she said grimly, it could compromise the security of every American naval vessel in the Pacific. As if triggered by her words, another alarm began sounding throughout the base. This time, it was the distinctive pattern that signaled a potential external threat. Someone approaching Pacific Ridge from the sea. Contact bearing 270. Distance 12 nautical miles and closing. Came the report from the harbor defense station. Unknown vessel. Not responding to radio challenges. Jessica moved to the harbor surveillance display, her experienced eyes immediately recognizing the tactical situation. A fast boat was approaching the base under cover of darkness, following a course that would bring it close to the shoreline within minutes. That's an extraction vessel, she said with deadly certainty. Someone is planning to leave the base tonight, and they have a ride waiting. Admiral Morrison grabbed the radio handset. Harbor Patrol. This is Admiral Morrison. Intercept that vessel immediately. Do not allow it to approach the shoreline. Sir, we have patrol boats en route, but the contact is moving at high speed and may reach the beach before we can intercept. Jessica studied the display, her tactical mind calculating distances, speeds, and interception courses with the precision that had made her one of the Navy's most successful commanders. Admiral Morrison, she said, her voice taking on the hard edge of combat command. Give me operational control of this situation. Morrison looked at her for a moment, seeing not the civilian assessor who had arrived 2 days ago, but the seasoned fleet commander who had fought through some of the Navy's most dangerous missions. "Admiral Chen, you have operational control," he said firmly. Jessica stepped up to the communications console, her bearing transforming as she assumed the role she was born to fill. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded ships in battle. "Harbor Defense, this is Admiral Chen, assuming tactical control. Vector patrol boats to intercept course 240. Establish a blocking formation between the contact and the shoreline. Authorization code Sierra 7-7 Alpha." The authorization code was one that only fleet commanders possessed, and its use sent a ripple of recognition through the command center. Suddenly, everyone was looking at Jessica with new understanding. "Ma'am, this is Harbor Defense. Confirming Admiral Chen in tactical control. Patrol boats moving to intercept." But even as the harbor patrol raced to intercept the extraction vessel, Jessica knew that the real threat was still on the base. Someone was preparing to escape with classified information that could endanger American lives around the world, and she was going to stop them. "All security teams, this is Admiral Chen." Jessica's voice cut through the radio chatter with unmistakable command authority. "We have a coordinated escape attempt in progress. Seal all exits from the base immediately. No one leaves without direct authorization." Throughout the command center, heads turned toward Jessica as the implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in. The woman they had dismissed as a civilian bureaucrat was now directing a complex security operation with the confidence and expertise of a seasoned combat commander. Commander Walsh dropped the folder he had been holding, his face showing the shock of recognition. "Admiral Chen," he whispered. "You're not just any admiral, are you?" Jessica glanced at him briefly, while maintaining her focus on the tactical display. "Commander Walsh, I need you to coordinate with base security to establish checkpoints at every vehicle exit. No cars, trucks, or personnel leave this installation until further notice." "Yes, ma'am," Walsh replied, but his voice carried a new note of respect that hadn't been there before. He had served in the Navy long enough to recognize the difference between administrative authority and combat leadership. On the harbor surveillance screen, the approaching vessel had changed course, trying to evade the patrol boats that were moving to intercept it. Jessica watched the developing chase with the calm focus of someone who had orchestrated far more complex naval operations under enemy fire. "Harbor Defense, adjust intercept course to 260. Anticipate. The target will attempt to circle back toward the northern approach." "Roger, Admiral. Adjusting course now." Senior Chief Rodriguez moved closer to the communications console, his experienced eyes studying Jessica with growing recognition. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what ship did you command?" Jessica's hands moved across the tactical controls with the fluid efficiency of someone who had stood watch on countless bridges during dangerous missions. "Several ships, Senior Chief. Most recently, I commanded Task Force 77 through the Persian Gulf." The effect of her words on the command center was immediate and dramatic. Task Force 77 was legendary in the Navy, the battle group that had fought through the Strait of Hormuz under heavy fire and brought 17 ships home without a single loss of life. Every officer in the room knew the story, and now they were looking at the commander who had made it possible. "My God," Admiral Morrison breathed. "You're the Admiral Chen, the one who completed the mission." Jessica finished firmly. "Just like we're going to complete this mission tonight." But even as she coordinated the pursuit of the extraction vessel, part of her attention was focused on Lieutenant Commander Blake, who had been growing increasingly pale and agitated as the situation developed. Blake was moving toward the exit, trying to slip away unnoticed while everyone's attention was focused on the harbor chase. "Lieutenant Commander Blake," Jessica called out, without turning from the display. "I need you to remain in the command center. We may have questions about supply chain security." Blake froze in the doorway, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. "Of course, ma'am. I just thought I should check on my department during the security alert." "Your department is fine," Jessica replied, finally turning to look directly at Blake. "But I'm not sure you are." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Blake's composure finally cracked completely. Her hand moved instinctively toward her phone, probably planning to send a warning message to her co-conspirators, but Senior Chief Rodriguez had moved to block her access to the exit. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said quietly, "I think Lieutenant Commander Blake should stay right where she is." Jessica nodded approvingly. Rodriguez had put the pieces together faster than most, recognizing that Blake's behavior was inconsistent with that of an innocent officer during a security crisis. On the radio, the harbor patrol reported their position. "Admiral Chen, we have the target vessel in sight. It's a high-speed cigarette boat, civilian markings, attempting to evade. Should we attempt to disable?" Jessica considered the tactical situation. Disabling the boat would prevent the escape, but it might also eliminate their chance to identify the foreign operatives who were waiting to receive stolen American secrets. Negative. Harbor defense. Maintain pursuit but do not engage. I want to see where they're planning to go. Admiral Morrison moved closer to Jessica, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Admiral Chen, what exactly are we dealing with here?" Jessica's eyes never left the tactical display as she responded, "A sophisticated espionage operation that has been running for months. They've been stealing classified information and selling it to foreign adversaries. Tonight, they're trying to complete one final exchange before disappearing. And Lieutenant Commander Blake is either a willing participant or a blackmail victim. We'll know which in the next few minutes." As if responding to her words, Blake's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen, and her face went even paler. Whatever she was reading was clearly not good news for her situation. "Lieutenant Commander Blake," Jessica said, her voice taking on the steel edge that had once commanded respect from admirals and foreign ministers alike. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Blake looked around the command center, seeing the faces of colleagues who now viewed her with suspicion rather than friendship. Her carefully constructed life was collapsing around her, and she was beginning to realize that there was no way out. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. Jessica walked slowly toward Blake, her bearing radiating the kind of authority that had once made enemy commanders reconsider their tactics. "Lieutenant Commander, I know exactly what you've been doing. I know about the money, the offshore accounts, the classified information you've been passing to foreign contacts. What I don't know yet is whether you were a willing traitor or whether someone forced you into this situation." Blake's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into a nearby chair. The weight of months of deception and fear finally overwhelmed her ability to maintain the facade. They have pictures," she whispered. "Pictures that would ruin my career, destroy my marriage. They said all I had to do was provide some routine information, nothing that would hurt anyone." Jessica nodded grimly. It was an old story, a classic espionage recruitment technique that began with compromise and escalated into treason through gradual steps that the victim never fully recognized. "Who are they, Lieutenant Commander?" "I don't know their real names," Blake said, tears beginning to flow. "They contacted me through encrypted messages, gave me instructions, told me what information to gather. I never met them face to face until tonight." "Tonight?" Blake's voice was barely audible. "They told me to meet them at the North Pier at 0400, said it was the final exchange, that after tonight, I would be free." Jessica exchanged glances with Admiral Morrison. The North Pier was exactly where the fast boat had been heading before the patrol intercepted it. "Admiral Chen," came the voice from Harbor Defense. "The target vessel has stopped engines and appears to be waiting. They're holding position about 2 miles offshore." Jessica studied the tactical display, understanding the situation with crystal clarity. The foreign operatives were waiting for their contact to arrive at the designated meeting point. When Blake didn't show up, they would either abort the mission or attempt a different extraction plan. "Admiral Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command decision. "I need a volunteer for a very dangerous mission." The tension in the command center had reached a breaking point when Jessica made a decision that would change everything. She turned to face the assembled officers, her bearing transforming from that of an investigator to that of a combat commander preparing for battle. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter, "I need you to understand exactly what we're facing tonight. This isn't just a security breach or a theft investigation. This is an active espionage operation that threatens the safety of every American sailor in the Pacific Fleet." Admiral Morrison stepped forward, his face grave with the weight of command responsibility. "Admiral Chen, what do you need from us?" Jessica moved to the central tactical display, her fingers tracing the positions of the patrol boats and the waiting vessel offshore. "I need this base to function like the precision instrument it was designed to be. And I need everyone in this room to understand that the woman you've been watching for the past 2 days isn't who you think she is." She reached into her portfolio and withdrew a leather credential case that she had kept hidden since her arrival. When she opened it, the gold shield and identification card inside bore the seal of the Chief of Naval Operations and the words, "Special Investigative Authority. My name is Rear Admiral Jessica Chen, Pacific Fleet Command. I'm here under direct orders from the CNO to investigate security breaches that have been traced to this installation. Everything I've seen and heard over the past 48 hours has been part of an official investigation." The silence that followed was profound. Officers who had dismissed her as a bureaucrat were now staring at a decorated admiral whose reputation was legendary throughout the Navy. Commander Walsh's face went white as he remembered every dismissive comment he had made about the civilian assessor. Senior Chief Rodriguez was the first to respond, snapping to attention with the precision of a sailor who recognized authority when he saw it. "Admiral Chen, Senior Chief Rodriguez, Communications Division. Ma'am, it's an honor to serve under your command." His words broke the spell, and throughout the command center, officers began coming to attention as the reality of Jessica's identity sank in. But Jessica waved them back to their positions with the impatience of a commander focused on the mission rather than ceremony. "Right now, I need your expertise, not your salutes," she said firmly. "We have a foreign intelligence vessel waiting offshore and a compromised officer who was supposed to make contact with them. We're going to turn this situation to our advantage." Jessica moved to the communications console, her fingers dancing across controls that she knew as well as any equipment on her own flagship. "Harbor Defense, this is Admiral Chen. I need you to maintain visual contact with the target vessel, but do not approach. Make them think we're still searching for whoever broke into the communications center." "Roger, Admiral," maintaining surveillance distance. She turned to Lieutenant Commander Blake, who was still sitting in the chair where she had collapsed, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes now showing something that might have been hope. "Lieutenant Commander, I'm going to give you one chance to redeem yourself and serve your country the way you swore to do when you first put on that uniform." Blake looked up with desperate gratitude. "Anything, Admiral. I'll do anything to make this right." Jessica's voice softened slightly, though her command authority never wavered. "You're going to help us capture the foreign operatives who put you in this situation. But understand this. If you try to warn them or sabotage this operation in any way, you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison." "I understand, ma'am." Jessica pulled out her phone and showed Blake a number that had been provided by Navy intelligence. "You're going to call this number and tell them that the security alert delayed your departure, but that you're en route to the meeting point. Tell them you have the final data package they requested." Blake's hands shook as she took the phone, but her voice was steady when she made the call. The conversation was brief and conducted in code words that Jessica recognized from intelligence briefings. When Blake hung up, she looked at Jessica with something approaching admiration. "They confirmed the meeting," she said. "North Pier in 20 minutes. Jessica nodded, then turned to Admiral Morrison. "Admiral, I need a team of your best security personnel to set up an arrest operation at the North Pier. Coordinate with the harbor patrol to ensure the offshore vessel can't escape when we move in." "Consider it done," Morrison replied, already reaching for his radio. As the pieces of the operation began falling into place, Jessica felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with combat command. This was what she had been trained for. The moment when careful planning and precise execution would determine success or failure. "Senior Chief Rodriguez," she called, "I need you to monitor all communications frequencies. If there are other foreign operatives on the base, they might try to warn the extraction team." Aye, Admiral," Rodriguez replied, moving to the communications array with the efficiency of a sailor who understood the stakes. Commander Walsh approached Jessica hesitantly, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine respect. "Admiral Chen, I owe you an apology. I had no idea who you really were." Jessica glanced at him while maintaining her focus on the developing operation. "Commander, you reacted exactly as I intended. The best undercover operations succeed because people see what they expect to see rather than what's actually there." "But how did you know? How did you identify Lieutenant Commander Blake so quickly?" Jessica's smile was grim as she adjusted the tactical display to show the final positions for the arrest operation. "Commander, I've been hunting threats to American naval power for most of my career. Whether they wear enemy uniforms or American ones, they all make the same mistakes. They get comfortable, they get greedy, and they start to believe their own cover stories." She paused, looking around the command center at the officers, who were now working with the precision and focus of a crew preparing for battle. The difference between a good naval officer and a great one isn't just training or experience. It's the ability to see what others miss and act on it before the enemy knows they've been detected. On the tactical display, green icons representing security teams moved into position around the North Pier. Red symbols showed the patrol boats maintaining surveillance of the offshore vessel. Everything was ready for an operation that would either capture a foreign intelligence team or allow dangerous enemies to escape with American secrets. Jessica picked up the radio handset, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded far larger operations under much more dangerous circumstances. "All units, this is Admiral Chen. Operation begins in 10 minutes. Remember, we want these people alive and talking. They can't reveal their networks if they're dead." As the final seconds ticked away, Jessica thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 days ago, she had been an unknown face walking through the gates of Pacific Ridge. Tonight, she was about to complete a mission that would protect American naval superiority in the Pacific. The transformation was complete. The hunt was about to end. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. The North Pier stretched into the darkness like a concrete finger pointing toward the enemy vessel that waited in the black waters beyond the harbor. Jessica crouched behind a shipping container with Admiral Morrison and the security team, watching through night vision scopes as Lieutenant Commander Blake walked slowly toward the designated meeting point. Blake carried a briefcase that appeared to contain classified documents but actually held carefully crafted decoy information prepared by Navy intelligence. Her steps were measured and deliberate, fighting against every instinct that told her to run from this dangerous charade. "Overwatch 1. This is Admiral Chen," Jessica whispered into her radio headset. "Report positions. Overwatch 1, in position, north side. 2 targets visible on the pier. Overwatch 2, south side clear. Harbor patrol standing by." Jessica adjusted her night vision scope, bringing the scene into sharp focus. 2 figures in dark clothing had emerged from the shadows near the end of the pier, their postures alert and professional. Foreign operatives, probably Russian or Chinese, here to collect the intelligence that would compromise American naval operations throughout the Pacific. "All units, maintain position until my signal," Jessica commanded. "Remember, we need them alive." Blake reached the end of the pier and stopped, her figure small and vulnerable in the green glow of the night vision scopes. One of the foreign operatives stepped forward, speaking in accented English that carried clearly across the water. "You are late," the man said. "The security alert caused complications?" "Yes," Blake replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "But I have everything you requested. Fleet deployment schedules, weapons system specifications, communication protocols." Jessica felt a surge of pride at Blake's performance. The young officer was risking her life to help capture the enemies who had destroyed her career and her honor. Whatever mistakes Blake had made, she was trying to make amends in the most dangerous way possible. The second operative moved closer, and Jessica could see him scanning the area with the professional paranoia of someone trained in espionage. "Something feels wrong," he said in heavily accented English. "Too quiet." "Where are the patrols?" "They're searching the communications center," Blake answered. "Everyone thinks the intruder is still on the base." The first operative reached for the briefcase, but his partner held up a hand. "Wait. Check the case for tracking devices." Jessica's pulse quickened as she watched the operative produce a small electronic scanner. If they detected the surveillance equipment hidden in the briefcase, the entire operation would collapse into a firefight that could let the main target escape. "Admiral Chen," came the whisper from Senior Chief Rodriguez over the radio. "I'm detecting encrypted communications from the offshore vessel. They're getting nervous." Jessica made a split-second decision that would determine the success or failure of the entire mission. "All units, execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Mark." The pier exploded into motion as security teams emerged from concealment with military precision. Powerful searchlights blazed to life, turning night into day and catching the foreign operatives in a web of blinding illumination. "Federal agents, nobody move." The operative with the scanner spun toward the voices, his hand moving toward a concealed weapon. But Senior Chief Rodriguez emerged from behind a piling with his sidearm drawn and steady. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Rodriguez said calmly. "We have you surrounded, and Admiral Chen doesn't like it when people threaten her operations." The mention of Jessica's name and rank caused both operatives to freeze. They had been expecting to deal with a compromised supply officer and a few base security guards. The presence of a flag officer suggested that their entire network had been compromised. "Admiral Chen?" the first operative repeated, his accent thickening with stress. "Who is Admiral Chen?" Jessica stepped out of the shadows, her bearing radiating the authority that had once commanded respect from allies and fear from enemies. "I'm Admiral Chen," she said simply. "And you gentlemen are under arrest for espionage against the United States." The operatives looked at each other, and Jessica could see them calculating their chances of escape. But they were professionals, and they recognized when a situation was hopeless. Slowly, they raised their hands. "Secure the prisoners," Jessica commanded, "and signal the harbor patrol to move in on the offshore vessel." As security personnel moved to arrest the operatives, Jessica walked over to Lieutenant Commander Blake, who was standing alone at the end of the pier with tears streaming down her face. "You did well, Lieutenant Commander," Jessica said quietly. "That took real courage." Blake looked up at her with something approaching wonder. "Admiral Chen, I need you to know that I never wanted to betray my country. They had evidence of personal indiscretions that would have destroyed my career." "I understand," Jessica replied. "And what matters now is that you chose to do the right thing when it counted most." As the arrest operation continued around them, something unexpected began to happen. Word of Admiral Chen's presence and the successful capture of foreign spies had spread throughout the base with the speed that only military communications networks could achieve. From the harbor patrol boats came the first salute. Petty Officer Martinez, who had been manning the searchlight, snapped to attention as his boat approached the pier. "Admiral Chen, ma'am, it's an honor to serve under your command." His salute was sharp and precise, delivered with the kind of respect that couldn't be faked or commanded. It was the genuine recognition of one sailor acknowledging a superior officer who had earned their position through competence and courage. The salute was infectious. As more security personnel completed their tasks, they began turning toward Jessica with the same gesture of respect. Not the routine salute given to any passing officer, but the kind of salute reserved for leaders who had proven themselves in the crucible of real command. Senior Chief Rodriguez was next, his weathered face showing the kind of admiration that came from recognizing true expertise. "Admiral Chen, ma'am." "Senior Chief Rodriguez, it's been an honor watching a real professional at work." Jessica returned each salute with the template precision that had been drilled into her at the Naval Academy decades ago, but she was surprised by the emotional impact of the moment. She had received thousands of salutes during her career, but these felt different. These were salutes given by sailors who had seen her work under pressure and recognized the difference between administrative authority and combat leadership. "Admiral Chen," came a voice from across the pier. Commander Walsh was approaching at a quick march, his earlier dismissiveness completely replaced by genuine respect. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology and an explanation." Jessica watched him approach, noting the change in his bearing and tone. The man who had treated her like a bureaucratic annoyance now moved with the precise steps of an officer reporting to a superior he genuinely admired. "Commander Walsh, you performed your duties exactly as you should have." A good staff officer protects his commanding officer from unnecessary distractions. Walsh stopped 3 paces away and rendered a salute that could have been used as a demonstration at the Naval Academy. "Admiral Chen, ma'am, Commander Walsh requests permission to express the gratitude of the entire Pacific Ridge staff for your leadership during this crisis." As Jessica returned the salute, she became aware that they were no longer alone on the pier. Officers and enlisted personnel had been gathering in the shadows, drawn by the news that the mysterious civilian assessor was actually one of the Navy's most decorated flag officers. The whispers that had followed her for 2 days had transformed into something else entirely. Stories were spreading of how she had identified the security breach through careful observation, how she had taken tactical command during the crisis, how she had turned a potential disaster into a victory for American naval intelligence. One by one, figures emerged from the darkness to render the kind of salute that spoke of genuine respect rather than mere protocol. Petty officers who had dismissed her as unimportant, junior officers who had joked about her civilian clothes, chiefs who had wondered why a bureaucrat was asking so many detailed questions. Now they understood. The quiet woman who had walked among them for 2 days, listening more than she spoke, observing more than she judged, had been a decorated admiral conducting one of the most important investigations in the recent history of the Pacific Fleet. As the arrests continued and the crowd of saluting sailors grew larger, Admiral Morrison approached Jessica with a mixture of admiration and embarrassment that was visible even in the harsh glare of the security lights. "Admiral Chen," he said formally, stopping at the regulation distance and rendering a salute that spoke of professional respect between flag officers. "Admiral Morrison requests permission to address the commanding officer of this operation." Jessica returned the salute with the crisp precision that had been her standard throughout 2 decades of naval service. "Permission granted, Admiral Morrison." Morrison's voice carried clearly across the pier, ensuring that everyone present could hear his words. "Ma'am, I want to publicly acknowledge that your investigation has exposed threats to naval security that my staff and I failed to detect. Your professionalism and tactical expertise have prevented what could have been a catastrophic intelligence breach." The admission was delivered with the kind of honesty that marked Morrison as a true leader rather than a press politician in uniform. He was taking responsibility for the failures at his command while giving credit where it was due. "Admiral Morrison, your staff performed admirably once the situation became clear," Jessica replied. "The failure wasn't in execution, but in recognition. These threats are designed to remain invisible until it's too late." As they spoke, Lieutenant Commander Blake approached hesitantly, her face showing the complex mixture of shame and hope that came from someone who had faced their worst mistakes and tried to make amends. "Admiral Chen," Blake said quietly, "I know that I have no right to ask for anything after what I've done. But I need you to know that serving under your command tonight, even in this small way, reminded me why I became a naval officer in the first place." Jessica studied Blake's face. seeing past the tears and fear to the potential that still existed beneath the poor decisions and compromised loyalty. Lieutenant Commander Blake, you made mistakes that endangered national security, but when given the chance to choose between your country and your personal interests, you chose correctly. What happens to me now? That will be determined by the courts and by the Navy's administrative review process, Jessica replied honestly. But your cooperation tonight will be noted in my report, and your willingness to risk your life to capture foreign operatives will be considered during sentencing. Blake nodded, understanding that she faced an uncertain future, but grateful for the chance to redeem some small portion of her honor. Thank you, ma'am, for giving me the opportunity to serve correctly, even if it was too late. As Blake was led away by security personnel, Jessica turned her attention to the broader implications of the night's events. The arrest of the foreign operatives and the exposure of the espionage network would require careful follow-up to ensure that all security breaches were identified and closed. Senior Chief Rodriguez, she called, and the communications expert stepped forward immediately. Yes, ma'am? I need a complete audit of all classified communications that may have been compromised over the past 6 months. Cross-reference that with Lieutenant Commander Blake's access logs and any unusual patterns in the supply chain records. Already started, Admiral. My team has been working on the correlation analysis since we secured the communications center. Jessica nodded approvingly. Rodriguez had anticipated her needs and acted without waiting for orders. The mark of a senior NCO who understood both the technical requirements and the strategic implications of the investigation. Excellent work, Senior Chief. Make sure your findings are included in the classified after-action report. As the immediate crisis wound down and the foreign operatives were transported to secure detention facilities, Jessica found herself surrounded by the officers and enlisted personnel of Pacific Ridge who had gathered to witness the conclusion of an operation that would become part of base legend. Admiral Morrison stepped forward again, his voice carrying the formality of an official ceremony. Admiral Jessica Chen, on behalf of all personnel assigned to Naval Station Pacific Ridge, I want to express our gratitude for your service to this command and to the security of the Pacific Fleet. What happened next surprised even Jessica. Despite her years of experience with military protocol and ceremony, Admiral Morrison began to applaud, and the sound was immediately taken up by every person on the pier. The applause grew and spread until it echoed across the water, a sound of recognition and respect that spoke louder than any formal decoration. But then something even more extraordinary occurred. As the applause died away, Senior Chief Rodriguez called out in a voice that carried the authority of 25 years in the Navy. Attention on deck. Instantly, every person on the pier snapped to attention with the precision of a parade ground ceremony. The effect was dramatic and moving. Dozens of figures standing in perfect military bearing under the harsh security lights, their salutes held steady and true. Jessica felt a surge of emotion that surprised her with its intensity. She had received formal honors, had medals pinned to her uniform by admirals and politicians, had been recognized at ceremonies attended by hundreds of people. But this moment, this spontaneous tribute from sailors who had watched her work and recognized true leadership, meant more than all the formal recognition she had ever received. She walked slowly down the line of saluting personnel, returning each gesture with the precision and respect it deserved. Each face told a story. Young sailors who had learned something about what leadership really meant, experienced chiefs who had recognized a kindred spirit, officers who had witnessed the difference between authority based on rank and authority based on competence. When she reached the end of the line, Jessica turned back to address the assembled personnel. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened here tonight was not the work of any single individual. It was the result of dedicated professionals who responded to a crisis with the skill and courage that has always defined the United States Navy. Her words carried across the water, but Jessica knew that the real message was being communicated through the simple act of mutual respect between sailors who had served together in a moment of genuine importance. 3 months later, Naval Station Pacific Ridge bore little resemblance to the place where Jessica had arrived on that foggy morning. The transformation had been swift and comprehensive, touching every aspect of base operations from supply chain management to security protocols. The new supply officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, ran her department with the kind of transparent efficiency that had been impossible under the previous regime. Every transaction was logged, every vendor was vetted, and every unusual pattern was investigated immediately. The culture of casual corruption that had allowed Blake's network to operate had been replaced by an atmosphere where integrity was expected and rewarded. In the communications center, Senior Chief Rodriguez oversaw systems that were more secure and more efficient than ever before. The security breach had resulted in a complete modernization of classified data handling procedures, with new encryption protocols and monitoring systems that would make future espionage attempts virtually impossible. Most importantly, the attitude of the personnel had changed dramatically. The cynicism and resignation that Jessica had observed during her first days at Pacific Ridge had been replaced by a sense of purpose and pride. Sailors who had once complained about out-of-touch leadership now worked with the knowledge that their contributions were valued and their security concerns were taken seriously. Admiral Morrison had embraced the changes with the enthusiasm of a commander who had rediscovered his mission. The lessons learned from Jessica's investigation had been incorporated into training programs that were now being adopted throughout the Pacific Fleet. "Admiral Chen," Morrison said, as they walked through the base on Jessica's final inspection visit, "I want you to know that your investigation saved more than just classified information. It saved the soul of this command." Jessica nodded, but her attention was focused on the details that told the real story of transformation. Sailors who moved with confidence and purpose. Officers who asked probing questions rather than accepting easy answers. Chiefs who treated security protocols as essential tools rather than bureaucratic obstacles. "The foundation was always strong, Admiral Morrison," she replied. "It just needed to be cleaned and polished." As they passed the communications center, Senior Chief Rodriguez emerged and rendered a salute that had become something of a personal tradition between them. "Admiral Chen, ma'am, final systems check completed. All green across the board." "Thank you, Senior Chief. Your work has set the standard for the entire fleet." Rodriguez's smile showed the pride of a professional who had been recognized for expertise rather than just longevity. "Ma'am, it's been an honor serving under your COSGOL standards. We won't let them slip." The transformation of Pacific Ridge had not gone unnoticed at the highest levels of Navy command. Jessica's investigation techniques and the rapid recovery of the installation had become case studies used in training programs for senior officers throughout the military. But perhaps the most significant change was in the way that authority and leadership were perceived throughout the base. The story of how a quiet civilian assessor had turned out to be one of the Navy's most accomplished admirals had become more than just a cautionary tale about making assumptions. It had become a reminder that true leadership could emerge from unexpected places and in unexpected forms. "Admiral Chen," came a familiar voice as they completed their tour of the base. Lieutenant Commander Blake approached in civilian clothes, her former confidence replaced by a quiet humility that suggested genuine personal growth. Blake had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, but her cooperation with the investigation and her heroic actions during the arrest operation had resulted in a recommendation for clemency. She would serve 18 months and then be dishonorably discharged, but her life was far from over. "Ma'am," Blake said, stopping at the proper distance and rendering a civilian's respectful nod, "I wanted to thank you one more time before you left." "Thank me for what, Blake?" "For treating me like a sailor instead of just a criminal. For giving me the chance to remember what honor actually means." Jessica studied the younger woman's face, seeing the evidence of hard-won wisdom that came from facing one's worst mistakes and choosing to learn from them rather than being destroyed by them. "Blake, you made serious errors in judgment, but you found your courage when it mattered most. That's not something that can be taught or commanded. That comes from character." As Blake walked away to begin the next chapter of her life, Jessica reflected on the complex nature of leadership and redemption. The investigation that had begun with stolen supplies and suspicious procurement records had ultimately revealed truths about human nature that went far beyond simple corruption. Her final stop was the memorial wall in the main lobby of the headquarters building, where the names of Pacific Ridge personnel who had died in service to their country were etched in black granite. Jessica stood quietly before the wall, reading names that represented the ultimate sacrifice that gave meaning to all their efforts to protect American naval power. Admiral Chen, Admiral Morrison said quietly, joining her before the memorial. Your work here has honored their memory. The security they died protecting is stronger because of your investigation. Jessica nodded, thinking about the sailors whose names would never appear on memorial walls because their sacrifices were too classified to acknowledge publicly. The men and women who had died in operations that officially never happened, whose families received folded flags without ever knowing the full story of how their loved ones had served. Admiral Morrison, the real honor belongs to the people whose names are on this wall and the people whose names can never be written down. We just try to be worthy of their example. As Jessica prepared to leave Pacific Ridge for the final time, she was approached by a group of junior officers who had requested permission to speak with her. Their spokesman was Ensign Michael Rodriguez, the nephew of Senior Chief Rodriguez, and a recent Naval Academy graduate. Admiral Chen, ma'am, the young ensign said with the earnest formality of someone new to the service. We wanted to ask you about leadership, about how to know when we're ready for real responsibility. Jessica smiled, remembering her own early questions about command and the weight of making decisions that affected other people's lives. Ensign Rodriguez, the question isn't whether you're ready for responsibility. The question is whether you're willing to prepare yourself every day to handle whatever responsibility comes your way. But how do we prepare for something we've never faced before? By watching, listening, and learning from everyone around you. The best leaders I've known weren't the ones who knew all the answers. They were the ones who knew how to find the right answers and how to implement them effectively. As Jessica walked toward her car for the final time, she passed the same guard post where Petty Officer Rodriguez had barely glanced at her credentials 3 months earlier. This time, the young sailor snapped to attention and rendered a salute that would have impressed his drill instructors. Admiral Chen, ma'am, it's been an honor having you at Pacific Ridge. Jessica returned the salute with the same precision she had shown on her first day, but now it carried the weight of shared experience and mutual respect. The honor has been mine, Petty Officer Rodriguez. Take care of this place. As her car drove away from Naval Station Pacific Ridge, Jessica looked back at the installation that had been transformed from a security risk into a model of naval efficiency. The fog was rolling in again, but this time it seemed to wrap around the base like a protective blanket rather than a concealing shroud. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Chief of Naval Operations. Admiral Chen, your investigation techniques are being implemented fleet-wide. Report to Washington for assignment as Director of Naval Security Investigations. Jessica smiled as she read the message. Another challenge, another opportunity to protect the Navy that had been her life for more than 20 years. But this time, she would be working openly, with the full authority of her rank visible to everyone who needed to see it. The quiet woman in civilian clothes who had once walked through the gates of Pacific Ridge unnoticed was about to become one of the most visible and influential officers in the entire Navy. The transformation was complete, and the real work was just beginning. Behind her, Naval Station Pacific Ridge continued its mission of maintaining American naval supremacy in the Pacific. But now, it did so with the knowledge that excellence was expected, integrity was demanded, and true leadership could emerge from the most unexpected places. The lessons learned during those transformative 3 months would echo through the careers of every sailor who had witnessed them, carrying forward the understanding that rank and authority meant nothing without competence and character. And somewhere in the Pentagon's classified files, a new standard was being written for how to conduct security investigations that protected both national security and the honor of those who served. It would be known as the Chen Protocol, and it would influence naval operations for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story, Please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us, where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget?